Well, I'd love to welcome everyone to this month's Native Filmmaker Initiative Film Club meeting. This month we watched Yellow Fever, and we've got two special guests here today. We've got Mike Jetty with the Office of Public Instruction here from Helena, and we have Tina Garnenes, the subject of Yellow Fever here. Do you guys each want to just take a moment to introduce yourselves?
Hello. I'm Tina Garnenes. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation, and I am just really excited to participate.
Mahami Takiapi, Ihani Wasteado. Hello, my relatives. It's a good morning. My name is Mike Jetty. I work at the Office of Public Instruction with Indian Education for All, a member of the Spirit Lake Dakota Nation and a Turtle Mountain Chippewa descendant, and glad to be here with you today. So thanks for having me along.
Thank you. Tina, for anybody who hasn't seen the film but is watching this, do you want to just give a brief recap of what Yellow Fever is all about?
Yeah, Yellow Fever is a movie about the history of uranium mining on the Navajo Nation, and it's also my family's history with uranium mining. My grandfather and several of my great uncles were all uranium miners. And it's just exploring the effects of uranium not only on the health of the people, but the impact that it had on the land as well.
Thank you. When the film opens, we first get a sense of the importance of that land to the Navajo people, and we get to know your family and your grandmother a little bit. Could you talk a little bit about what you've learned from your grandmother about the connection of the Navajo people to that land?
I think the most important thing I've learned from my grandmother and the connection is just how vital the connection is. It's not, I mean, it is part spiritual, but it's deeper than that. It's a true physical connection. When Navajo people, when they have their children, the umbilical cords, the little piece that's still attached, gets buried somewhere in the earth or in an area where you want your child to grow strong in the corral or in the farm or anywhere where you want your child to be drawn to. And so that connection builds as the years pass, and so it's a deeper connection to place. It's not something that is easily broken. It's just an extremely strong connection to the land. It becomes a part of you and you become a part of it, and it's just this constant relationship.
And another piece of that you talk about in the film is the connection to sheep. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, the sheep and goats are members of my family. They are not only animals, but they are teachers, they are company, they are friends, they are my elders, they are my babies. We've had sheep and goats in my family since my great-great-great-grandmother. We've always been sheep herders as far back as I can remember. So they've gotten us through historically hard times. If you're unfamiliar with the Long Walk of the Navajo, the sheep and goats were the thing that sustained us. A lot of the Navajos that didn't go on the Long Walk, the forced march to Bosque Redondo, they hid in the mountains, and they were able to use the sheep and goats to sustain them. And then even after that, the Livestock Reduction Act happened, and that was a slaughtering of the sheep and the goats and the cattle. And the government said it was because of overgrazing, but from my perspective, it was seen as an attempt to just remove us. It was like a genocide, basically. And the sheep and goats, again, got us through that. The Great Depression, any historical event, that herd has been a lifeline for my family. And even now, to this day, there aren't many families that have sheep and goats, but my family does. And it's a tradition I dearly, dearly hold on to. And I love fostering that love for the herd and my nieces and nephews, because seeing them continue the tradition just brings so much joy to my heart. And so we take care of them because they take care of us.
Yeah, that's a deep, deep generational connection. Mike, do you want to connect that at all to any of our essential understandings that we have in our Montana curriculum?
You bet. And thanks for sharing that, Tina. That it's powerful when you really think about that in a deeper way. I just have a few slides to share, kind of setting a stage and putting this in a context for Montana. And let me pull up my slides here, and hopefully you can see these. Is that on your screen now?
Yes.
It is.
Well, we created these essential understandings regarding Montana Indians, but I think they apply to, indigenous groups, not only in the U.S. but around the world. And I really like this third one, thinking about traditional beliefs, spirituality, traditions, and then that connection to oral history that connects tribes with place. Those ceremonies, those songs, those stories involve, all the elements, whether it be the land and creation, or the stars, or animals, and connections with all of that. And that's pretty powerful. And those beliefs and the ceremonies, they still are practiced and lived by many people today. And you can really see the importance of land. In Dakota, the word for the earth is Unchimaka, and it means grandmother. And so, to think of, the earth as our grandmother and how we treat that. And thinking about land, too, and connecting this to what's going on in Indian country, we talk about reservations. And that was land reserved by tribes through treaties and executive orders. And misconception was that folks think land was given to natives, when in fact, all that land was reserved, and the government promised to, uphold those treaties and promised the natives certain things, and that still is, legal, valid documents, and that connects to this. That tribes are, sovereign nations, and how they interact with, different agencies and the government, and you can see that, hopefully tribes have and will continue to exercise tribal sovereignty in regards to, these environmental issues that impact, not only native people, but other folks in those communities. And so you think about, the land, back in 1492 it was all native land. But as you see, the movement west, and in the 1860 and what was going out in the west, you look at, the further diminishment of native lands, and then the current situation, you can see in red are the current reservations, and of course there's Navajo country is the largest one down there. And you think about natural resources, and this kind of gives some general information. There's over 567 tribes, over 200 Alaskan villages, 2 to maybe 3% of the U.S. population. But look at those two bottom bullets: 40% of the nation's coal reserves, 20% of the nation's fresh waters. And we still have, energy companies really looking to, continue to exploit those resources. And what's really going back to the native folks, I think that's a big issue we all need to be concerned about, because it impacts everybody. So hopefully, at least that gave you a little bit of, context for, what's happening in Montana and across the U.S. in regards to, tribes and their natural resources. Like, I'll give you a good Montana example regarding coal. The Crow tribe, is actively pursuing, the mining of coal, and they say they want to continue to do that. But right next to them is the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, and the Northern Cheyenne tribal government says, no, we don't want to, tap into that coal, and for, lots of issues. And so there's, example of tribal diversity. One tribe saying, let's go after the resource. Another one saying, we don't want to. And so, there are those issues that come into play, and, economic considerations. But the big base of all that from Native perspectives is that, essential understanding 3, those spiritual connections and that. And I think that is something that we really need to pay attention to. So those are just a few of my thoughts, I guess.
Thank you. Yeah, those bottom 2 bullet points are pretty shocking when you think about 2% of the country's population and 40% of the country's coal reserves. And I think that that connects to something that Tina talked about in the film, was this idea of an energy sacrifice zone. Tina, do you want to talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, I think it all sort of it all sort of begins with the difference in values, and I don't want to generalize, but just, I guess, from my own experiences, it's what it looks like to me. So growing up as a Native American woman, I was taught that you don't take more than you need, and you also don't just, you want to be in balance with the world around you. So if it looks like you don't live there, if it looks like you're not using the land, good, you're doing it right. It's not like you go in with a bulldozer and flatten everything and kill all the trees and chase all the animals away. That's not how things are done. And so the difference in those two views of how you use the world around you has impacted how companies are able to look at the land on the reservations. Primarily, I know the Navajo Nation. It looks like there's nobody out there. It looks like nobody's using the land. And it's because we are, but we're just doing it carefully. And so by it looking like there's nobody out there, no one using the land, these companies are able to move in and use that excuse. Like, no one's using it, no one's here, no one lives here, no one's built homes, no one's put up fences. But from our point of view, we don't want to put up fences. We don't want to kill everything around us because we're living in balance with it. It takes care of us as we take care of it. You know, we need all the trees available to clean the air. We need the groundwater running. We need to take care of the soil. We need to take care of all of it so it takes care of us instead of moving in and destroying it. And so I think it was sort of our own downfall, I guess, by taking care of the land too well, because these companies think no one's there, and so it's easy to exploit. And like, oh, no one's here. And so in that sense, we have turned ourselves into energy sacrifice zones. These companies can come in and extract all the resources, whether it's uranium, oil, natural gas, coal, and they don't care what it does to the environment or the health of the people who live in that area. So the companies, they take and they take and they take, and then all the resources are gone, and the companies are gone. And who's left with the cleanup? The indigenous people that still live in those communities. And so it frustrates me deeply that, because Native communities aren't destroying the land, we're seen as not using it, and therefore these companies can sacrifice us for their own gain.
I think that something that was really impactful that the film made clear was that in terms of nuclear power, because of the uranium, you're in this really resource-rich area, but all of those resources are going far away from the Navajo Nation. They're being used in Las Vegas and LA to power big cities, but where the uranium is actually being mined, those people there aren't using that power.
Yeah. Yep. There's a lot of without electricity and running water.
And of course, one of the effects that you do see on the Navajo Nation of uranium mining is the effects of radon, and that is one of the major themes of the film as well. Could you talk a little bit about the effects of radon on the Navajo people? We see you testing for it in your own water.
Yeah, so radon's just this, it's a radioactive gas. It's part of the decay of uranium. It's odorless. It's really hard to detect. And so the miners were the first people that were exposed to it because they are deep down underground. And if they had just improved ventilation a little bit in the mines, it wouldn't have impacted their lungs as much. But because the mines weren't ventilated, the radon was inhaled and it settles in the lungs, and it's the #1 cause of lung cancer in non-smokers. And that was a majority of the miners. Nobody was smoking, but all the miners got lung cancer. And so that's one big impact of radon. And then a couple other areas that they're still not able to draw a direct correlation is between radon and leukemia. But they know that uranium itself can impact the skin, the stomach, the kidneys. I mean, it destroys the body, basically. It settles in the bone marrow. It's a really dangerous thing to be exposed to continuously. And it wasn't only the miners, it was their families, because a lot of their miners brought their families to live with them and near them without knowing the dangers of that. And so not only did the kids play on the dangerous tailings at the outside of the mines, but they also, the men would pull water from the mines and use that for their homes without knowing how contaminated it was. And so radon's just really, really bad. Radon and uranium are just really bad, and people weren't made aware of these dangers, and they just were exposed to them daily.
Yeah, no, and something else that's really powerful about the film is that we see people throughout different communities who are aware of these negative health effects, but are still so connected to the land that they live on that leaving isn't really an option.
Right. And I think that's one of the hardest things for people to understand is when you think of families who are able to transfer across the country for this job or that job, that's not something I personally or my family can do as a Navajo family, because our ceremonies are so tied with the land. My body is physically tied to the land. My sheep and goats, I can't move to New York City with my herd of 300. And so just the traditional way of life and the belief system, I mean, all the prayers and the songs are tied to that area. All the trees are familiar with me. It's impossible to leave. And although the area is highly contaminated, there's nowhere else to go, if that makes sense. Like, there's nowhere else I would want to be.
Mike, do you have anything to add or a question for Tina?
Yeah, I'm curious, Tina. Does the Navajo Tribal Council, do they take any steps to, really try and, work with the energy companies, or, try and, negotiate some of those, like the balance? Can there be a balance? Or I'm just curious, has there any been part on the government to try and rectify the situation?
There have been a few small steps. A few years ago, one of the last Navajo Nation presidents wanted no mining at all, no uranium mining specifically, on the Navajo Nation. And there are some cleanup efforts, but because there are so many mines and so little money, that it's really difficult to do any sort of big change all at once. I mean, I see it in the paper all the time. The Navajo Nation's been awarded this much money for uranium cleanup, but because there are so many mines and it's such a big area and such a small group of people within, I guess, the Navajo EPA and elsewhere, it's really hard to get it all done. And so there are small things being done, but for the most part, like even the cleanup efforts have been minimal. Most of the mines are just either like they bulldoze and close the mine, or they put up little cinder blocks to keep the mine away, but it's not enough. I mean, even the tailings piles, you have to monitor those basically for the rest of everyone's life, because uranium decay is just this continuous thing. You can bury it, you can run it over, but it's just going to be a non-stop effort. And so it's really hard to deal with the mess that's been made.
Yeah, that's why I'm so thankful that you're out there, that there's, folks taking this issue on, because there's still so much to be done. And films like this raising awareness of what is happening in Indian country, and it's going on across the U.S., and it's going to hit Alaska too with them, approving, the drilling in the Arctic Refuge. And so, and then with, so it's always on an ongoing, fight. And if something I can encourage students to do is, learn more about these issues in your own communities too, and take action.
Yes.
As even though if you're just a student, you can get out there, you can talk to your, leaders in your tribal, or, city council, or your mayor, or your tribal council, or wherever you're at, and say, hey, this is our future. We need clean water. We need to have, crops that are growing in a healthy way. And so I think it's an issue for all of us. And what I'm really hopeful is that indigenous knowledge and that connection to the land, and thinking about, 7 generations ahead, I think that's where, we really can learn from that indigenous wisdom and knowledge and share that with everybody. And we really need to change how we live, no matter who we are, where we are, and what we use, because we are gluttons as a society. And, how do we, like what you're talking about, Tina, work to get back to that balance and really think about our own role in this, because we are, globally connected. What we do here, what happens in Navajo country impacts people across the world. And how do we really, we say mitako yasi, we're all connected, we're all related, but how do we really live that in our own lives, in our own communities? And I think, I encourage everybody out there to, really take a look at some issues that impact today, but the future, and what can we do to all work together on that. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Tina, do you have any advice for students who want to be active about environmental issues?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is realizing the power of your voice, your own voice. Whether we live in a day and age where technology is just at our fingertips. We can use it for anything, whether it's Instagram or YouTube or Facebook, anything. We have so many opportunities to be heard on a global scale. I mean, it's opens the door to so many other people. We can reach everyone, and I think that's amazing. And so I think one thing is recognizing that and using that to your advantage. I mean, even if it's like a short blog that you write about oil on your reservation, or if you talk about methane emissions that are impacting your tribe, or dam building that's keeping you from fishing on your traditional lands, anything. I think as Native Americans, since we're usually marginalized, we're usually stereotyped and seen as either not existing or seen as only stereotypes, whether that's we all wear headdresses, or we're all alcoholics, or we're all gambling addicts. I think opportunity to tell our own stories and use our own voices to tell those stories, and I think that's the most important thing. Learn that you have a voice, be proud of your voice, and use it in any way you can, whether that's a little YouTube video, whether that's little posts on Facebook. There's so many opportunities to be heard, and I think utilizing all of that is important.
Thank you. Yeah, and one of the ways that you do share your voice that we see in the film is through your photography, and you used it as a way therapeutically to cope with PTSD, and also to kind of discover your own identity and to share your story and your connection to your history and your family. Do you want to talk a little bit about your photography and how you share your voice through art in that way?
Yeah, I have been taking photos since I was a very young woman, and as I got older, I started realizing that it was a rare opportunity for me as a Native American to tell my own stories, to share stories and pictures of my own people, right? If I were an outsider going anywhere on the reservation to take photos, you could see in the photographs if people were visibly uncomfortable. But because I'm a brown person going into my own brown community, taking pictures of everyone, everyone's more relaxed, everyone's a little more at ease, and so it comes across in the photos. And so it's me telling my own stories as we are. I don't want to dress everyone up in regalia and like, this is what we look like, this is only how we look. I want to look at my tribe, my people as we are, and sort of show people that not only do we still exist, but we aren't all just stereotypes. I want to show that we are people, we are still here, and I think that's just really important I think representation matters, and I think that's a big part of why I photograph people, and my family, is just because I don't want someone else taking photos of my family and saying, this is who we are. I want to show those photos and say, this is who we are, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Mike, do you have anything to add? Any creative outlets that you have where you share your story? Or
I just want to, tell Tina something that was in that film. It's like when he showed Navajo Elvis in the parade. Made sure to highlight him. That aspect, the humor, but tribal cultures aren't static. That we incorporate, modern, contemporary things. And does Elvis sing in Navajo then? Is that what he does?
I don't know. It was just a very brief. He was like going by. I'm like, hey, look, there's Elvis.
Yeah, that was funny. But you think about what was I going to say here, tied into what you were talking about? an Elvis song popped into my head, so I went off in this direction. But, you think about, like what you're talking about, using those tools at our hands that everybody has now, to share stories. And whether it be through photography, that's a powerful medium, or poetry, or whatever it may be. The thing I was thinking about that was the images of Native people today. Like here in our office, we put out a set of posters called Honor Yourself, which featured young American Indians under the age of 35 who were doctors, lawyers, teachers, military, a whole broad range of careers, but doing really neat stuff and offering advice. So not just the, person in regalia, to powwow, but, people, in their office or wearing a suit or standing by some law books or, so to present that, who we are today. And not just like what you're talking about, Tina, the stereotypical Native. One thing I wanted to share here is we have a book of poetry called Birthright, and it's American Indian poets. And I thought I'd read a short poem from a Salish woman who lives up on the Flathead Reservation, and it gets at this issue of connections to land. And the poem is called My Reservation. Is that okay to do that real quick?
Please do, yeah.
Yeah. And these are all accessible on our website, but students across Montana use these as a way to, hear another Native voice through, poetry. And this one's called My Reservation by Jennifer Green. Dig up the earth with machines shaped like an old woman's arthritic hand, clawing and grasping, digging. People come in droves to Montana for the beauty, they always say. Beauty only they can recognize and define. Knock down the trees that grow naturally, build a big house with solar panels, to be naturalists, of course, trying to recreate the suburbs among the rattlesnakes, month-long blizzards blinding white, wood ticks, and very little rain. There are giant, soft mountain cats with big, warm faces that hear and smell, whose jaws will crush the skull of a child. Complain about the bear problems because they eat cattle and get in the way. But my brown face is a bigger threat than any cat or bear. And that's Jennifer Green. But, she says a lot of powerful stuff with that poem. And what she says in her own reaction to that poem is the sense of place. Shaped by the landscapes I've lived in. And she said she didn't realize how strongly the mountains around her home had shaped who she was as a person. And so living in an open, beautiful, treeless landscape taught her how to be comfortable with her own voice. And she says each place has its own story to tell. And to me, that's powerful. And, whether you out there as a student can share something like that, and get your voice out there, I say do it because it's important and how we all need to do this together. So that's just a few of my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That's powerful. I think we can all spend some time outside where we live and really thinking about how that place has shaped us and impacted us as a person. And when you connect to a place on a really personal level like that, it can even motivate you more to make sure that it's protected.
Yeah.
And I love that you brought poetry in as an example of another way that you can share your voice. Some of us are poets, some of us are photographers, some of us are filmmakers. There are so many different venues and avenues for you to get your creative voice and your own story out there, which is why we really appreciate Tina being here today. Do you want to talk a little bit about what it was like to be the subject of a film and to communicate your voice in that way and how that may have been different from the photography?
Yeah, it was very, very strange. I'm more comfortable filming and taking photos and not necessarily being on the other side of the camera, so it was very different. But I knew how rare of an opportunity it was to be not only a Native American, but to be a woman whose voice was chosen to be heard. And then I was just blown away by that. Like, wow, you want to hear what not only a woman has to say, but a Native woman has to say? That's unreal. So it was really exciting from that perspective. And also, my grandpa James was someone who was very dear to me and to my family. And so to share his story and to share the story of something that's very painful for a lot of Native or Navajo people was important. And I think one of the hardest things about filming was when we started, more families would approach us to talk about their own stories, you know, how they lost their husband or how they lost children born with birth defects or how the uranium is impacting their health. I mean, it was unbelievable how many stories came out of filming this movie. And the unfortunate thing was that we couldn't include all the stories because there were so many. And that's devastating to think that not only is it painful for me and my family, but hundreds of families out there. And that was the hardest thing to deal with, was just that there wasn't enough room to fit all the stories in that we wanted to. But the process itself was also painful. You know, my grandmother didn't openly want to talk to the filmmakers about it. She would tell me as soon as they walked away or stopped recording, but she wouldn't talk to them. Or my mother couldn't talk about her childhood or losing her father without crying. And it was really tough. Some days were harder than others to film because it's such a painful subject. But I think it's an important story to tell. So many people are not aware of the uranium mining that took place on the reservation. And if they are aware of it, they're not aware of how much it impacted the lives and the land. And so I think just getting the story out there was important, and that helps my whole family and I realize that and sort of pull together to finish it.
Yeah, it must have been a challenging process. And going back to what you were saying about not being able to include all of the stories, that's definitely something that I think a lot of filmmakers face. They have to, especially documentary film, you collect a lot of stories and a lot of footage about a variety of different histories and themes, and you can't include it all. But I think that even when it doesn't end up those stories specifically in the final cut, you've learned a lot from listening to those people, and what you've taken away from them can still be included in the message of the film. And I'm sure that even just going to talk to those families, you took something away with you that did end up in the final product in spirit, even if their story wasn't in there. And I think that something I've learned as a documentary filmmaker is how to really get people's stories out of them a little bit, and how to keep that with me, even when I'm not making a film. Just talking to people about their different histories and their experiences is valuable, whether or not it makes it onto the screen in the end. Yeah. Is there anything that we haven't touched on yet that we should get to, or any questions or lingering thoughts that we should leave our students with today?
I want to put in a plug for one of our curriculum resources. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, let me show you this. Are you familiar with Eloise Cabell? She filed the largest class action lawsuit in United States history against the federal government for the mismanagement of billions of dollars that it should have gone to Native peoples. And Tina, you talked about, women's voices. Eloise did something, she's a member of the Blackfeet Nation, and took on the whole U.S. government and won.
Yes.
Because of, all those billions of dollars that the energy companies took and, left Native peoples, still living in poverty. And then she exposed that. And she, through over 10 years in a lawsuit, she's as important in American history as, say, Rosa Parks, standing up and fighting for what's right and for, putting her voice out there for all Native people. And so, we develop units around films like this, and like the study guide for, your film, Tina. I think it's so powerful that there's not enough Native voices out there, but we can use media and films and YouTube and, poetry to put it out there. And so, if anybody's interested in learning about Montana Indian women and their impacts, we have a curriculum resource called Resilience, which puts out stories of, powerful Native women and their contributions to, the world. And so I encourage you, if you're in a Montana school, to check out that curriculum piece called 100 Years. So.
Great, thank you. Tina, any last words for our Montana students?
Yeah, I want to thank you all for watching. I really, really sincerely appreciate it. For someone who grew up deep on the reservation with a bunch of sheep and goats, I never thought that I could do something big, and creating something that reaches a lot of people really means a lot to me. So I really appreciate that you took the time to watch Yellow Fever. But one thing I want to encourage all of you is to share your stories. It doesn't have to be about uranium mining. It doesn't have to be about energy extraction. It could be about a story your grandmother told you. It could be about your ideas for how tribes can coexist in the modern world. Anything. I think it's important to tell your stories, whatever they are. And I think that's something I would love to encourage you to do, is to share your stories. Use your voice, whether it's poetry or, stickers, graffiti, anything, photography, videos, anything. Just express yourself, use your voice, be proud of who you are. I think all these things are very important, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch this.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank both Mike and Tina for joining us today. I also just want to take a moment to thank the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences for funding this program, and Vision Maker Media, from which we've gotten this great content and we're able to watch Yellow Fever today. Our next film is Indian Relay, so I hope that you're able to join us for that. Thank you, everybody.